Today, we are going to be discussing big blind defense. This is something a lot of people do incorrectly. Something I do incorrectly is I don't have my microphone in the right spot half the time. Give me just a minute. This is going to be a rather short show today because I have a poker coaching webinar today at promptly 10 a.m. So we have to make sure we're fully prepared for that. So we're going to be talking about big blind defense for just a little bit, and then we will be done. Goodness gracious, what a hectic day. All right. First things first. At the start of your day, get your cup of coffee, have a nice sip, get in the mood, get in the zone. Enjoy your life and be happy that we get to have this experience here together. I'm happy to be here with all of you. Let's have a good day. This is my second cup of coffee this morning. I drank the first one pretty much immediately. That's how it goes sometimes, especially when your cup is a little small. All right. So, big blind defense. Today's poker coaching homework challenge was essentially a big blind defense question. And I want to talk about two brief things here. The first is that essentially you want to be defending your big blind with a pretty wide range. If you are watching this here on Instagram today, you are not going to be able to see the ranges. So I suggest right now you head over to youtube.com/pokercoaching or twitch.tv/Jonathan Little because we're going to be showing ranges. Okay? So if you're watching here on Instagram, they won't let me show you the ranges. So please head over to one of those other channels, assuming you want to see the ranges. Looks like we're going to be super popular on Instagram today. Go figure. So when someone raises, when you're playing shallow stacked, we're going to be discussing 15-ish big blind poker here on pokercoaching.com. We have charts for various other stack sizes. But when you're facing a raise, usually that's going to be a min raise. If your opponents are raising larger, you should defend tighter than the ranges I am about to give you. Okay? And that's because you're getting worse pot odds. As your pot odds get worse, you should be defending tighter. Your opponents can't raise smaller than a min raise, so you can't really defend a whole lot wider than these ranges. However, if your opponents don't play the optimal ranges themselves, in turn, you should continue to adjust, right? If your opponents, let's say, only raise with pocket aces, well, now you should defend incredibly tightly, folding almost everything, right? If your opponents raise with all sorts of garbage, you should be defending even wider. And one thing I think you'll actually find is that a lot of people do raise a little bit too wide. And if they're raising a little bit too wide, then you get to defend wider. So let's take a look. First things first, again, if you're watching on Instagram, head over to youtube.com/pokercoaching or twitch.tv/pokercoaching right now, because I'm showing some ranges to all those people there. So whenever under the gun raises, this is first position at a 9-handed table, when they make a min raise, playing 15 big blinds deep effective, that means that essentially among the two players remaining in the hand, you're playing 15 big blind stacks. I understand sometimes there may be cases where under the gun has 50 big blinds, everybody else has 50 or 60 or 70, and you have 15 in the big blind. That's a slightly different scenario. But if everyone's playing roughly 15 big blinds deep, these charts very much so apply. So this is the Gto strategy solved using Munker Solver, which will give you slightly different ranges than Pio Solver will. And you're going to find that these Munker Solver ranges typically are just more accurate. And that's because it's a much better solver when it comes to solving multi-way scenarios. It can do that, whereas Pio Solver only solves heads-up scenarios. But the problem with Munker Solver is it takes significantly more resources, which means it takes more time and money to get the solutions. But hey, I don't have all the time, but I have money, so I'm happy to spend money to get these ranges to turn around and give to all of you members of pokercoaching.com. All these charts are in the tool section at pokercoaching.com, so go download them. They're there for you. So as you see, with this range, we are going all in with the hands in blue. We're calling the hands in green. One thing you may notice, we're playing, what is this? 78% of hands against an under-the-gun raise. That may sound incredibly loose to you. Ask yourself, under-the-gun raises, are you really defending Queen 3 offsuit and 8-7-5 offsuit whenever you are facing a min raise? A lot of people aren't. Again, if you're watching on Instagram, go to twitch.tv/Jonathan Little or youtube.com/pokercoaching to see the images that I'm showing you. Unfortunately, I'll show you what we're dealing with here on Instagram. They don't let me show you the screen. You see how we can see the screen over there? See those ranges there? You don't get to see those more on Instagram because they make me use a separate device. How brutal, huh? You think they'd make it easy for me to share with everybody else. So anyway, go do that. Okay, so very, very wide defending range. 7-2 suited is playable. You'll essentially realize that the worst hands in poker in terms of equity realization, which means how often you are going to get the equity you need out of the pot, are the offsuit, the bad offsuit cards, usually medium card and low card offsuit. So you see these hands in white get folded, but everything else gets played. 6-3 offsuit gets played. 7-4 offsuit gets played. If you are playing deep in a tournament, which is usually when you're going to be playing shallow stacked, in that scenario, you should probably fold out the bottom of this defending range. You may say, why, if these hands are profitable? Well, we want to fold out the bottom of this range, like Queen 3 offsuit, 9-6 offsuit, 8-5 offsuit, 7-4 offsuit, 5-3 offsuit, 6-3 offsuit. You want to be folding out those hands because you want to make sure you're playing when you have a decent edge. And when you are calling with the very bottom of the range, these hands are like barely profitable. So if they're barely profitable, you should just fold them if there are payout implications. We just hired a new coach to pokercoaching.com, James Romero. He is a world-class player, one of the top 10 players in the world last year. And he studies a ton when it comes to player pool tendencies. And he is going to be sharing with you how to make adjustments based on what your opponents do wrong. And, for all we know, he may say to play a little bit tighter in this spot, or maybe even a little bit looser, right? He's going to have data that will help us know how to further adjust from the Gto strategy. Burr said he came in 12th place in a 10,000 player tournament. Just short of the big money. Yeah, well, still not bad. Still not bad. Will webinar be at next full hour? I'm not sure what you mean. What is RFI? RFI means raise first in. That's whenever someone min raises playing 15 big blinds deep. So this is when under the gun min raises. All right, so as you see, very, very wide defending range. Let's now take a look at big blind versus low jack or high jack raise. As you see, pretty much equally wide ranges. Not a whole lot changes. It is kind of interesting to see hands like Queen 10 suited and Jack 10 suited jamming, whereas they're not jamming against under the gun. You see generally tighter jamming under the gun. That's because the under the gun player will call your all in more often. That makes sense, right? Because the under the gun player should be raising tighter. Therefore, you should shove tighter. As the raise comes from later and later position, you get to jam with a slightly wider range. 7% against under the gun, 11% against low jack or high jack. Okay? Again, very, very wide defense ranges. The reason we're covering this today is because at pokercoaching.com at 10 a.m. Eastern time in 50 minutes, I'm having a webinar specifically on 15 big blind defense and then how to play post-flop. And something a few people did wrong is they just played very, very tight before the flop. They were folding out a lot of these offsuit cards, a lot of the bad suited cards, and it's just too tight. You cannot be that tight. If you're that tight, your opponents are going to run you over, and you don't want to get ran over. If anything, you want to run your opponents over. All right, now it's going to start to get even looser. Cutoff versus big blind. So this is when the cutoff min raises, and we are in the big blind. In this scenario, you see now even more jamming. Now we're jamming 16% of hands. So stuff like ace 4 offsuit, any pair besides aces. Big ace X offsuit, low ace X offsuit, right? Big ace X suited, low ace X suited. And you may say, why are we not jamming aces? Well, because you need to slow play sometimes. In this scenario, I imagine aces and kings are both, if you want to look at the actual GTO strategy, they're probably both just flat called some portion of the time. And the reason for that is it lets you call with a slightly wider range of junk. Like you see Jack 5 offsuit gets to call in this scenario. And that's probably because you get to, you have a hand like aces in your slow playing range. It is fine to slow play before the flop with exactly aces and kings. As we're going to see here, when you are on the button, you see now aces and kings both slow play. They just flat call before the flop. Again, people on Instagram saying you can't see the images. Yes, I know. Instagram doesn't let me share my screen with you. You have to go to youtube.com/pokercoaching and watch us live there. There, you can see these images. Or twitch.tv/pokercoaching. I'm sorry, twitch.tv/Jonathan Little. Okay, so again, big blind versus button. We see we're actually jamming, interestingly enough, slightly, a little bit wider, not much wider than against the cutoff. We were at 16% against the cutoff, 17.6% against the button. And you'll see the same thing holds true. What a few people did wrong in the homework challenge today at Poker Coaching is they would jam with a very polarized range. They would jam just the absolute best hands, and they would jam some junk. And you really don't want to be jamming junk, because when you jam junk and get called, you're in bad shape. So what's happening here is essentially your jamming range is basically linear. You see, it's just a lot of the generally strong hands, mostly pairs and ace-x. That's because pairs and ace-x are usually the best hand at the moment. And then all the other hands, like king-queen suited, king-jack suited, king-10 suited, queen-jack suited, these hands flop very well and want to see the flop. While you could profitably jam with them, that does not mean you should jam with them. What a lot of people do wrong is they follow what is called a reshove chart. There's a popular push-fold app out there that has reshove charts, and people blindly follow them, and that is a big, big, big mistake. You are literally lighting your money on fire. And in this scenario, you see we're supposed to play about 75% of hands. I'm not sure of the exact number following a reshove chart because you should not use that strategy, but you can probably only profitably play something like 40% of hands or 50% of hands if you're following a reshove chart. So would you rather play 50% of hands profitably, or would you rather play 75% of hands profitably? Well, it turns out your options are not only all in or fold. When you're playing shallow stack, you get to call sometimes. And this is a good example of this, where you see all of these hands in green that you're supposed to call. This is what you're supposed to do against a player who plays perfectly. Again, what if your opponent plays a little bit too loose? What if they raise 60% of hands on the button or 75% of hands on the button? Well, now you get to play even wider. And interestingly enough, if you look at the equity of all these hands that we fold, like 10-4 offsuit, 7-4 offsuit, they're actually just barely unprofitable. And that's because when you are in this scenario, when your opponent min raises the button, you have to put in one big blind to try to win a pot that's going to be 5.5 big blinds total. 5.5 big blinds. Where do we get 5.5 big blinds? We have buttons raise, your call, and the big blinds. That's 4 big blinds, right? Plus the ante, plus the small blind. Or plus the small blind. Yeah, ante and small blind. So you're putting in 1 to try to win 5.5 total, which means you really do not have to defend post-flop all that often. So you defend a ton pre-flop, and then you get to just check fold a lot of the time after the flop. You just showed up late. Can you go over what you've gone over so far? No, that's not how this works. However, you can watch the replay. All of the replays of A Little Coffee are available at youtube.com/pokercoaching. If you're listening to this on Audible today, sorry you don't have the charts, go to pokercoaching.com, look in the tools section. You can actually download all the charts and have them forever. One of these charts has 4s and 5s jamming, but not 6s. Why is that? These are implementable GTO strategies for 15 big blind poker, which means if you actually go through the GTO strategy of, let's see what chart you're referring to. You're referring to big blind versus under the gun. What's really happening here is probably 6s, 5s, 4s, and 3s all jam some portion of the time. Like, let's just say 50% each, roughly. In that scenario, it doesn't really matter what you do with either of them as long as you are calling them roughly 50% of the time and jamming them roughly 50% of the time. A way to make this implementable, though, is to just pick one hand and do it 100% and pick the other hand and do it 0%, opting to use the other strategy, whatever it is, the opposite of the opposite amount of the time. So let's say 6s is jammed 50% and 5s is jammed 50%, and they're called the other 50%. Just pick one hand and jam it all the time, and pick the other hand and call it all the time. It's not perfect GTO, but it is definitely close enough, and you can just print out a chart and follow it. It makes your life way easier. Same thing if you look at ace-5 suited jamming here and ace-4 suited calling, it's probably some mixed strategy. For all I know, it could be like 30, 20, 20, 20 for ace-5, ace-4, ace-3, ace-2 suited. And if that's the case, then you can just pick one hand and shove it every time and pick the other ones and call it every time. So these are implementable GTO charts. They're not perfect GTO charts, but they're charts that you can blindly follow. Why are we just calling aces? To trap. Yeah, aces are great. Aces are great. Polly says, yeah, my homework is terrible now. Yeah, today is Poker Coaching Homework Challenge Day, so this is part 1 of that question. Is it only when heads up on the flop, or does it count in situations where the small blind flats too? No, when someone raises and someone calls in between, it changes things significantly. If someone limps and then someone raises, it changes things significantly. We're discussing the specific scenario where someone raises and then everyone else folds to you. Is king 10 suited in the cutoff with 11 big blinds a shove? Depends on what your opponents do, right? Does this strategy work in sit and goes? Well, in ICM matters a lot. Sometimes you should play this way, sometimes you shouldn't. If you're enjoying this video today, click like, click subscribe. That goes a long way to helping me help others. Now let's discuss big blind versus small blind limp. So whenever everyone folds to the small blind, you're going to find that if they're good, they're most likely, with a 15 big blind stack, going to use a wide limping range with some shoves. Kind of a linear shoving range like we're shoving over raises. So when the small blind limps, here is the strategy for the big blind. Again, if you're watching this on Instagram, sorry you can't see the charts, head over to youtube.com/pokercoaching to see them. So you see we are raising with all of the best hands for value, just a pure, straight, linear range, right? Sixes and better, A7 suited better, Ace-9 offsuit better, King-9 suited better, King-Jack offsuit better, and Queen-Jack suited. And when we raise those hands and get jammed on, we call off against an all-in. And then we have a smattering of bluffs. We have some King-X offsuit, Queen-X offsuit, Jack-X offsuit, 10-X offsuit, 9-X offsuit, 8-X offsuit, and 7-2 offsuit. These hands get raised as a bluff. When I say raise, I mean a non-all-in raise to about 3.5 big blinds or so. And that's a powerful strategy. Again, notice the hands that are likely best but flop poorly are jamming. That's going to be common on all these scenarios. That's going to be Ace-X offsuit and the low pairs. Okay? And that's the plan. If we do raise to 3.5 big blinds and then the small blind jams, we call it off with all the obviously good hands, right? Six is better, ace, seven, all these hands on the top. And we fold all these hands on the bottom. And that's going to be impossible for the opponent to exploit. If the small blind just open jams all in for 15 big blinds, oh, it's not going to let me show it. How do I do this? Let's see. Give me just a second. Let's see if I can figure out a way to do this. There we go. Okay, if small blind open jams all in for 15 big blinds, we call off with this range. You may say King 9, 10-9 suited, King 7 suited, Jack 10 offsuit. Well, if the opponent is playing perfectly, that is what we should call off with. However, again, this is the game theory optimal strategy. This is not the strategy for when your opponents play poorly. And most people, when they jam from the small blind, they're actually jamming a little bit too tightly. And if they're jamming a little bit too tightly, that in turn means you should call off tighter, right? Instead, you're going to find that a lot of people limp a lot. And if they limp a lot, then we should actually play this range, but slightly differently. We should raise a little bit wider for value, because what's going to happen is our opponent's going to limp, we're going to raise, they're going to call, and then they are going to call or fold a lot. So we should perhaps raise a little bit wider for value, and maybe even a little bit wider as a bluff, because we're raising wider for value, right? So that is what we're doing in this scenario. So this is generally how you want to play the big blind. A big, big, big important point here is that you want to be calling a ton from the big blind. And that's because you are getting amazing pot odds before the flop. And when you're getting amazing pot odds before the flop, you really just don't have to win after the flop all that often. And the nice thing about being shallow stacked is that when you call pre-flop, if you make any pair, you're just happy to get it all in. You're playing for your stack. Whenever you flop any draw, you're happy enough. You're going to be playing for your stack. However, when I say playing for your stack, something a lot of people do wrong is they always check shove the flop. I did this for the longest time, and to be fair, it's not that bad of a play. It's kind of like rejamming. It's profitable, but it's not the best play. The best play after the flop, a lot of the time, is to actually check raise small with the majority of your range. So, say we do defend. Flop comes anything. In our homework challenge today, I think it comes like 10, 7, 6, something like that. We check. The opponent bets 1.5 big blinds or 2 big blinds. You should check raise small to like 5 big blinds, leaving yourself 8 big blinds behind. You may say, what? Well, that actually allows you to check raise with some very low equity bluffs, as well as all of your pairs, or the majority of your pairs that are happy to get their money in, like top pair. And also it allows you to check raise with the strong draws that can easily call it off if they do get jammed on. So while it is profitable to check shove, like if you just check shoved any pair and any draw, it's probably fine. But you'll make a little bit more money by check raising small with the vast majority of your range. Let me actually look at the GTO strategy real quick. Is there a way to show you all this? No, there's not a way to show you this. In this scenario, the GTO strategy actually does not have any all-ins on a board like 10-7-6. It check raises small with all of the hands it plans to check raise, and only to about 2.5 times the opponent's bet, which is really interesting on a board like 10-7-6, 2 hearts. You'd think you may want to check raise some flush draws and some hands like Queen 8 for a gut shot. But in reality, no check jamming range, just a small check raising range with the strong made hands like top pair and some smattering of draws. So cool stuff. We're going to be discussing that thoroughly in the Poker Coaching Homework Challenge later today. You're trying to buy the spring sale, but you can't find it. Yeah, you missed it. It ended yesterday. However, if you send an email to support@pokercoaching.com, tell them that you want it because I said you can get it in a little coffee today, I will make sure you get it. Send an email to support@pokercoaching.com to get a big discount on Poker Coaching and Poker Coaching Premium. Tell them you want the spring sale, and tell them that, well, if you send the email before 10 a.m., actually, let's give people time to watch this. If you send the video before, or your email before, let's say Tuesday, because I know people are going to watch this or listen to this later, you can still get the spring sale. Send an email to support@pokercoaching.com, and you will get a big discount on Poker Coaching. Is there content on Poker Coaching that answers short stack, raise first in to induce versus just shove? Which strategy is most profitable? Well, most profitable depends on your opponent's tendencies, right? But we definitely have loads of content on how to play short stack. We have content by Michael Acevedo, who literally wrote the book, Modern Poker Theory. It's right back there behind me. He wrote the book on GTO strategy, and he discusses how to play all these scenarios thoroughly. He has videos on Poker Coaching, specifically on short-stacked strategies. So make sure you check those out. You hated that part on the homework. What is RFI? RFI means raise first in. That means when everyone folds to that person, they raise, and then everyone else folds around to you. Do we have any check raise folds in this spot? Yeah. When you do check raise, let's see. GTO strategy. Let me see if I can find some ones that are obviously check folding. Queen Jack. Check raise. Queen Jack offsuit is going to check raise and then fold, right? That's a check raise. We have stuff like Ace 5 offsuit. Check raises sometimes on 10-7, 10-6-5. 10-7-6 and then folds. Ace 2 offsuit check raises sometimes. 5-4 offsuit check raises sometimes. And then reluctantly folds, I imagine. I'm not sure what 8-2 does. 8-2 probably check raises and then folds sometime. You have to realize all these are mixed strategies, right? And for that reason, it's, difficult to know exactly what it's doing. All right, let's see. You've been doing tons of quizzes. If you're interested in the rewards, you go to support@pokercoaching.com. Send us an email. Are these suggestions if everyone has roughly 15 big blinds? Essentially. Or like someone raises and everyone yet to act has 15 big blinds, or the initial raiser has 15 big blinds. Have I tried blueberry coffee? I have not. I'm sure it's good though. Can you talk about how to use these strategies in ICM scenarios? I can. The problem is that it's very, very difficult to discuss specific scenarios, right? Like say you're the big stack, right? And a short stack raises. In theory, you should be jamming on them a lot, right? Like you should not be doing a whole lot of calling because they should just fold to your jam a ton. However, what if they now only raise with really good hands because they know you're going to jam a lot? Well, now you shouldn't jam much of anything. So it's very difficult to try to discuss like GTO ICM strategies because it depends a ton on what the opponents are doing. And also it depends on the other stacks at the table, right? Like let's say someone raises off a 15 big blind stack and there's 3 stacks with 2 big blinds. Well, is that player raising only the nuts? Because they should. Or are they still raising too wide? If they're raising too wide, you should jam 100% of hands as the big stack. If they're raising really tight, you shouldn't jam anything, right? So it really does start to depend on what the opponent's strategy is. And it depends on all the other stacks at the table, and I don't have like an image of all the tables loaded up here, so no, we're not going to discuss that all that often. How often do we do these streams? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. What heads up display do I use? I use a heads up display called GALF2, GALF2. It's nothing fancy. Has standard pre-flop stats, and then it has flop, check raise, flop continuation bet, flop fold to continuation bet. Same for the turn, same for the river. And that's basically it. I don't think you need anything fancy for tournaments. Especially if mainly you just don't have you don't have a big sample on anyone for most of the stats. So really you only get reasonable pre-flop stats on people that actually matter. You're replacing it with mushroom coffee. Yeah, I drink, what's it called? 4 Sigmatic coffee some portion of the time, and it's good. Should you adjust to tournaments with faster structures? No, you should just realize you're going to be playing shallow stacked. How many hours of online play can you say you're a winning or a losing player and not know it's just luck? It depends on how many hands you're playing, how many tournaments you're playing, where are your wins coming from, right? It's not just how many hands or hours do you play. Someone asked on Instagram, can you ask you a question? Yeah, feel free. In your video blog at Bahamar, you mentioned you were thinking about getting in a tournament, but you wanted to gauge the talent of the field first. How do you determine that? All right, so I was probably talking about one of these $10,000 buy-in side events. When you show up to a $10,000 buy-in side event, first things first, there's usually not going to be a whole lot of people playing. A lot of people late register. When you show up, if it's all good players, how do you know if they're good? Well, fortunately for me, when I go to a tournament, I'm playing with, like the top 100 players in the world are mostly there. If you look at the field and it's 9 out of the 10 top 100 players in the world and a number 500 guy, it's a tough tournament. You don't want to play. There's no value there. If you show up instead and you look and there's like maybe 2 bad players and 5 good players, then it's a good tournament. So it really is just a composition of bad player to good player. Lumber, I have no clue what you're saying. Polarizing my coffee drinking range. Yeah, I drink all sorts of coffees, drink lots of teas. That said, I think oolong tea has been making my skin dry out around my eyes recently, so I've gotten off oolong tea, and it turns out the dry skin went away. I like oolong tea, though. It's a bit of a bummer. I think I may have to get off of it. What about small blind strategy? Listen, all of this is outlined at pokercoaching.com in the tool section. I'm not going to sit here and go through every single chart that I have right now, because I have to go get ready for the homework challenge. What's the goal of ICM, or when you're in the money but short stacked? Depends on where you are in the money. Are you just in the money? If you're just in the money in a 1,000-person tournament, so like 100 people get paid or 150 people get paid, and you're a shallow stack, well, now there's like no payout jumps for a while, so you're trying to get a hold of a lot of chips. If instead 9 people get paid and there are 2 other short stacks, well, your goal is probably to outlast them and get a payout jump or 2, because they might be semi-significant. How does someone remember all these charts? Well, Leonard, you're not supposed to actually remember and memorize all the charts. You're supposed to study the charts and reference the charts enough to the point that you just roughly know what to do. I have a push-fold quiz on my poker coaching app, and I get every single answer right the vast majority of the time. I mean, the only ones I get wrong are like ones that are very much on the cusp and very, very close spots, which means they're basically break even anyway. And by referencing these a ton, like looking at them every single time you play, you will eventually figure it out. How do you track your play on tournaments and games where they don't allow Poker Tracker, Hold'em Manager, etc.? It's tough. Some of the sites will allow you to download the hand histories later, so definitely do that if you can. But you have to write down your hands is what it amounts to. There's really not any other great option. Can I make a video on perfect heads-up display stats? Honestly, I'm not the right person for that. Does that HUD work on ACR? As far as I know, Hold'em Manager, Poker Tracker, all the heads-up displays work on ACR. Lumen products. All right, I'll look it up. Lumin. Shout out to Lumen products. Maybe they're good, maybe they're bad. I'll tell you in a week. 2 people referenced it. All right, well, good. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not the best person on heads-up display stuff because I really don't use them. And I think to some extent, a lot of sites are getting away from it. Like I know on Party Poker, you can't use heads-up displays. On GG, you can't use heads-up displays. So like PokerStars, you can. ACR, you can. All the like random shady apps, I mean, obviously you can't. Say obviously, I presume you can't. Maybe there's a way to play them on your computer, I'm not sure. Maybe you can, I don't know. I'm not playing on any of the shady sites. So anyway, I don't know. Just go to hold'emmanager.com and look at list of supported sites. It'll come right up, it'll tell you. It's not like, don't ask a random dude on the internet. Go to the company's website and see what the company says. Should you focus on tournaments or cash games or both? You should probably focus on one if you're not great already. If you're not already crushing a game and beating a game, and you've actually played a decent amount of time, so you're not just like a total novice, then you should probably focus on one game. And usually for most people, that is cash games. And the reason is cash games, or something like sit and goes, is because you can play those for a short period of time, right? Because if you play cash games, you can play cash games for like 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours and be done. Whereas if you play tournaments, you're locked in all day, every day. Last night, one of my friends won 130K online in a tournament, but the tournament started at like 3 p.m. and lasted until 4 a.m. or something like that. And that doesn't work for a lot of people. Obviously, if you knew you were going to win 130K, you'd sign up and you'd do it. But that's that. You are a non-believer in unregulated sites. I'm not sure what you mean by non-believer. I certainly believe they exist, and I know they are unregulated. Has that changed after a charity tournament? No, absolutely not. If anything, that makes me think they're going to get shut down even faster. You know, PokerStars and Full Tilt didn't really get shut down for a while. But once they started doing very public, very blatant affronts to the U.S. government, that's when they started to get shut down. Turns out, telling the government, hey, we don't care. We're going to do whatever we want. The government doesn't like it when you tell them very blatantly to their face that you're going to break the rules. And if anything, doing high-profile things like random charity tournaments is a great way to get the attention of the authorities. Do you think they should ban heads-up displays? I mean, heads-up displays are good for good players, right? Like, I know I have a higher win rate on sites where I can use a heads-up display compared to sites which I can't use a heads-up display. So, did they make the game softer? I mean, did they make the game... Does banning the heads-up displays decrease the edge of the pros? Definitely. Decreases the edge of the pros. So is that good for me? Obviously not. But it's good for the game long-term. What do I recommend for playing in tough cash games? We have a lot of content at pokercoaching.com. Go through the cash game masterclass. That's part of Poker Coaching Premium. Go to pokercoaching.com/premium to check that out. Also, I know Matt Affleck has a lot of good content on cash games. Our sit and goes a tougher grind. Well, it depends on the edge, right? All it really asks is, all you have to realize is what is the edge that you have in any individual game. And it depends on site to site. It depends on the rake. It depends on the player's tendencies, right? Depends on all sorts of minor things, but they all add up to be quite significant. What's the name of the heads-up display? It's nothing fancy. It's just called GALF. It really legitimately has VPIP, pre-flop raise, steal percentage, 3-bet percentage, fold to 3-bet percentage, flop, turn, and river, continuation bet, fold to continuation bet, and check raise percentage. And that's like all it has, I think. It's really not fancy at all. Would you advise joining pokercoaching.com? Definitely join pokercoaching.com if you want to get better at poker. Can you purchase poker coaching with Bitcoin? Send an email to support@pokercoaching.com and you can purchase it with whatever you want within reason. If you have any questions about payments, memberships, anything like that, any question, it's not too crazy, I promise you. Send us an email, support@pokercoaching.com. You thought I said that sit-and-goes were hard to make mistakes, so the skill gap is small. I did say that. But did you not hear what I just said? I legitimately just said, depends on the rake in the game, it depends on the opponent's skill levels, right? If the sit-and-goes have low rake and the opponents are terrible, you can make money. You can make money in any game, like literally any game, right? And at the small stakes, sit-and-goes are a great way to win money because the opponents are terrible. At the medium stakes and the high stakes, sit-and-goes are a terrible way to make money because the players are good, right? I mean, it really is as simple as that. Are your opponents making obvious mistakes? And they are in the small stakes, they're not in the high stakes. In cash games, people make mistakes all the way up to the very high stakes, which is why cash games are great. How many buy-ins did you start when you moved up in stakes? I started with $50 and I played Limit Hold'em back in the day. They didn't have no Limit Hold'em back then, really. So I played Limit Hold'em. I started with $50 and never had to put any more money into the game. We grinded it up nice and slow. And once I got to the highest limit games I had, I decided to play sit-and-goes because you could play a little bit bigger in sit-and-goes. And then we, turned that $50 into $350,000 within a few years, with the biggest buy-in game being $200. A lot of people think you have to spike and get lucky to have any chance to win money, but that's just not true. You just have to find a game you can beat and play it a ton. If you find any game you can beat and play it a ton, you'll make all the money. Back in the day, I did the same thing in live poker. I would sit there and play 5-10 no limit at Bellagio and make about $25,000 or $30,000 a month consistently, playing 12 hours a day every day. I wanted to make some money. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to sit there for a year, print my 360K. Biggest buy-in was $1,500. Nothing fancy, but that's how you win lots of money long term. What separates the top 10% winners from the top 1% winners? Probably just maximum amounts of dedication, finding a good study group. Having a good group of peers around you who also want to become the best in the world and putting in an immense amount of study and dedicating your life to it will make you very, 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 very good. If you only do it halfway, well, you won't be nearly as good. What's the earliest you busted out of a live tournament? I mean, definitely in the first few hands. I mean, that happens all the time. I remember one time, it was so funny. I was playing at WPT Borgata in some tournament, or some World Poker Tour event, and Nick Schulman came in. He flew in. He bought in like 2 minutes late. This is when you could not re-enter. This was a while back. He showed up a few minutes late, sat down. On like the first or second hand, he made quads against a straight flush and lost for like 300 big blinds. He just got up and left. It was so funny. But no, I mean, you bust early in tournaments sometimes. It happens. You get set up, you lose. Or you get aces. You get it all in with aces against kings, and you lose. 12 hours a day. What do you do to avoid burnout? Turns out you don't get too burnt out when you're making $1,000 a day. At least I don't. Could you imagine being unhappy making $1,000 a day? That's insane. All right, I have to get going. I have my poker coaching homework challenge right now. So I have to go. If you want to be part of the challenge, go to pokercoaching.com, sign up right now, and we're having a webinar where we're going through a interesting short stack scenario coming up right now. Did I cash out for my bankroll when I was playing tournaments? Well, I'm sorry, whenever I was started with $50. No, my goal wasn't to cash out money and spend it. My goal was to get good at tournaments and get good at cash games, get good at sit and goes and win money, not spend my money. If you spend your money, you can't move up as fast. Do you take some of the money out of your bankroll? No. Don't take money out of your bankroll. That is a detrimental mistake, assuming you don't need the money. My favorite story about this is whenever I first started playing, me and one of my friends played poker together. We were both good. We were the two best players in the game. We probably won about the same amount. Every time he would win $20 and $1 buy-in games, he would spend it on a new CD or buy a new pair of shoes. I would just keep it. After 6 months of this, I had a nice little pot of money. He had a bunch of CDs. I don't know what he's doing today, but he's not playing poker professionally. And, well, it turns out if you spend all of your money on nonsense, you'll have a bunch of nonsense. If you keep money in your bankroll, you will be able to play bigger games and print more money. Do you play PLO much? I played PLO very hardcore for about 6 months, as I've done most games, to get experience and learn it just in case the game takes off. But PLO is definitely not taken off, so turns out it was not the game of the future like people thought it was. Kind of like short deck. I don't think short deck's going to be the game of the future like some people think it is. I could be wrong, but seems like No Limit Hold'em is where the action is, and it doesn't seem like it's changing anytime soon. All right, I have to go. If you enjoyed this, click like, click subscribe, share it with your friends. Thank you very much for being here. I will be back on Wednesday, bright and early, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of Little Coffee.